Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 57, and we're diving into the first data, but also some pre data for the Brothers' War. And before I start, just a reminder this stream is sponsored by mtgazone.com, a website where I recently wrote a big guide on removal, and very soon I'm going to write an article on the different cards that require numbers in making sure that they work and exactly where those numbers lay, so you can look through that when that appears. There's also plenty of stuff from J2S Josh. There's been a really nice sealed primer from the Jordan, who also started writing for that. So, it's me, and there are also good Magic players writing about limited in gazone.com. So do some clicks. Click on all my articles. That will help me build some credibility with the owners. So yeah, I will be very glad if that would happen. What else? That's, I guess, it for the introduction, because we want to get to the meat of this presentation. And the meat of this presentation is some first look at the data and also some look at the pre-data data. But again, every single time before I start going into the actual topic, I have my small preamble, and this one is based on the Bank of America announcement that they downgraded the stock of Hasbro. And as reasons for that, they gave their shameless draining of the Magic player base and overloading with products and not thinking about the long-term strategy. Now, you might have heard it in some other limited podcasts, but I am not a financial advisor, so I'm going to tell you to buy or sell Hasbro stock. I'm going to tell how parts of their analysis, at least, are close to my heart, because they touched on one thing that I always thought with the current WotC strategy for creating a product. It's a product that has a very, very hard entry. And if you have a very hard entry, it means that you're not particularly interested in new players. You basically treat them as sort of throwaways, people that will buy a couple of packs, play a bit, and then get bored and stop playing. Their whole strategy was aimed at whales, so people who spend a lot of money on Magic products, collectors, people super invested, people that play the game for 20 plus years. And game based on whales slowly dies, because with every whale getting bored or having a heart attack or going bankrupt and not being able to play anymore, they lose a large chunk of their money base, basically. And this is not the kind of strategy. I'm not questioning its financial merits. Bank of America did it for me. I'm questioning just how I see that game. I mean, I'm playing this game and I want it to be as big as possible. For it to be as big as possible, it needs fresh blood entry, accessible level, and it needs some sort of format where new players can go in arena, very quickly have all the cards, and be able to learn how to play, have some kind of competitive possibilities, and expand the player base. I honestly think that Arena should have all the standard cards available at all times for every player as a sort of phantom collection. So on top of your normal collection, you have access to 4-offs in every standard deck possible. And that would allow people to make their standard decks, play their standard, get their fix. If they get good enough, they will start playing historic, they will start playing older formats, they will start playing limited. And I think it's a much better strategy for the health of the game and for the how many people are playing it. Mercurio says it seems like digital card games generally are dying off. People just don't have attention span. They used to, and they'd rather play stuff like Marvel Snap or Flesh and Blood. Yeah, these are two different games. One has the vibes of old Magic in terms of competitive, and that's Flesh and Blood. Marvel Snap, I do play it. It's very quick, so that's I guess a plus. But I think it's also not only to do with it's not only to do with attention span. I think it's a lot to do is with economy. I have so many people in my LGS that don't play Arena because they just can't enter at the right level. They have to play scrappy decks for a long time. I always convince them to make your quests, collect gold, use the gold to play quick drafts, use quick drafts to collect cards, use those collections to play later. But not everyone has that amount of time that can dedicate to Magic. That's why I think that free for all standard would be good. Lots of people would play just standard, and that's fine. It would create traffic on the website, but also some people will go deeper into it because they will have ability to compete at the proper level because they will have access to all the cards. Okay. And this is like my biggest worry about Magic. It's not the card being too wordy. It's not about price of reserve list or whatnot. It's basically that there's just not enough young people entering. And you see that when you see professional tournaments, and you see the same people who you saw in 2007 being in top eights all the time, and very few young people entering. And those young people are also approaching 30 right now. And I started playing Magic when I was like 16. I was competitive when I was like 18 to 22, and that was the time. That was the time to be there. But yeah, I don't see many of those people at all in the competitive scene because it's so also hard to get there. And those very invested top players are still playing, and I'm not saying they're taking place because they're amazing and they should be playing. It's just that somehow there is just not enough entry points for younger players. But okay, enough of that digression. I'm sure you're dying to hear about the Brothers War. And I'm on the wrong bloody screen. Okay, yeah, there we go. So first of all, I'm going to briefly talk about the removal. Normally I do that before the set was released, but last week I did other things, and this week, well, I'm going to talk about it, but we already know a bit more than I normally speculate on cards. But first of all, I will talk about the damage-based removal. I'm not going to give you the list of all the unconditional removals. That's not that interesting, as we're already playing the format, so you probably has met most of the culprits. But just to give you the impression of how good is different type of removals, there is always some damage-based removal that kills creature with toughness X or less. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the case of this set. There's not so much of the 1 damage removal. Actually, there is not a single one that is a spell. So that particular spell part is missing. But there are a couple of creatures. There is the Knowing Vermin, 1 mana, 1/1 that when it dies, it gives -1/-1 to something. And there's also the Arbalist Engineer, the 3 mana, 2/2 in Gruul colors. When it enters the battlefield, it can ping something for 1, among other options. And it's interesting that they didn't put anything in this sense into the format, because there's quite a lot of X1s in the format. There's 29% of the creatures at common level are X1s. 26% of uncommons are X1s. Just 13 rares and mythics, but that's to be expected. But 29, as you will see in the next slide, is quite actually a large number for X1s, and there's no dedicated spell that deals specifically with them. Also, there's only a couple of 1 damage sweepers, and one of them costs 6 mana and is not really good. The other one is probably playable. On the other hand, 2 damage spells, 48% of commons are killed by Disfigure, the 1 mana target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. This is not a lot. This is very medium in terms of that. Luckily, Disfigure can have other uses. It can be also used as a sort of combat trick. You block their 4/4 with your 3/3. You play Disfigure, and all of a sudden, you traded a 1 mana spell for a 4/4. So that's a good deal normally. But also not many spells that can deal 3 damage in this format. Actually, there's pretty low amount of this conditional damage removal in the format in general, and conditional removal in general. And this may have something to do with the larger than normally presence of the massive creatures. And probably they limited the amount of damage-based removal because it feels bad when you only have damage-based removal and you are faced with 6/6s all the time. But yeah, 48, 43, and 32% of creatures in common, uncommon, and rare mythic rarity is killed by this figure, which is not as good as in some formats. Let's put it like that. Then there's 3 damage removal. I think that Excavation Explosion is the prime example of this type of spell. 73% common creatures will be killed by that, and then it drops off quite steeply to 63 and 51% in uncommon and rare rarities. Now, obviously, Excavation Explosion can go face, which is a very important feature of that kind of spell, and also gives you a Power Stone, which means that at 3 mana it ramps you to 5 next turn potentially, and you can play the 5 mana artifact, for example. 4 damage. 89% of the common creatures is killed by 4 damage spell, which makes Obliterating Bolt an amazing raid, because for 2 mana I kill 90% of common creatures, and also 78% uncommon, 72% rares. That's quite a lot. And it exiles, which is also important with all the unearthed creatures in the format. So this card, I wrote in my removal guide from last week. It's excellent and amazing. And spoiler alert, the numbers are pretty good for it. So it seems like I was right in that particular case. And then Unleash Shell, pun pun pun. That's a 5 mana, deal 5, and it deals 2 to the face. Kills 96% of common creatures. 2 Unleash Shells kill all common creatures, including the 10/10. But probably that's a steep price to pay. But it also kills around 90%, like 89, 87% of the uncommons and rares, which is basically unconditional. However, it doesn't deal with the biggest threats in the format, which can be a problem. So how does numbers compare with the previous sets? Like I told you, there is plenty of X1s in this format. Only Streets of New Capenna had more. And you have to keep in mind that Streets of New Capenna had a lot of 1 toughness creatures with shield counters, and here we don't have those. So 1 power creatures are probably going to be better in this format than normally, and it shows in the initial data at least. So there is hope that those soldier tokens are not complete throwaways. They can actually deal with quite a large chunk of creatures. This is basically this is, by the way, based on commons only. I didn't look at high rarities because you're going to be playing against commons most frequently. 2 damage, on the other hand, it's only 48%. I think only AFR had lower number than that. So when you combine that, 1 X1s were one of the highest fractions, and 2 and less are one of the lowest fractions, it means that there's painfully few creatures with 2 toughness, which is something that you should consider. I think that this format has weirdly huge amount of 2/3 creatures, and also lots of them cost 4 mana for some reason, but 2/2s are bouncing off those quite badly. So think about that when you put a 2/2 in your deck. That 2/2 better scale up with the game, like the Argothian Sprite, or have something else like Menace, like the 2/2 that makes a Power Stone when it enters the battlefield, red uncommon. But yeah, it's nowhere near Streets of New Capenna or Midnight Hunt that had 60% of the creatures were covered by 2. In those formats, like something like Shock would have been amazing because it deals with so many common creatures. Here it becomes much worse, and luckily for this figure, as I already mentioned, it can be used as a combat trick, so it can be used differently. But keep in mind that using a removal spell as a combat trick comes with extra scare of being 2/1 if something wrong happens. Then when we look at the X3s, it's sort of levels up between sets there, but Brothers War is on the lower end of the spectrum here, together with Kamigawa and Kaldheim. These were the formats where there were the fewest 3 and less toughness creatures, and again far away from Streets of New Capenna, where creatures were markedly small in terms of toughness. And I think that the last graph shows you that Wizards' design team mainly uses the knobs on those 1, 2, and 3 toughness creatures in terms of making sure that they can adjust the format, because across the board it's more or less the same amount of the 4 and less toughness creatures across all the formats. And Brothers War is bang in the middle here with 89. Most of them fit in a very narrow range between 87% and 93%, where 93 is almost an outlier there. So huge variation at this level, and relatively no variation in here. Which is in part why those 5 damage removals will be depending on how frequently those 5 toughness creatures are being played, because the number of them will be more or less the same in all the formats. The question is, are they playable or not? And I think that's how they regulate those bigger creatures. In some formats, they are much more playable. Like, remember Tolarian Terror from the last format, that was defining of the whole format. And that's why some 4 damage spells were just not good enough, because they didn't deal with the Tolarian Terror. And in some formats, they are all unplayable, and then you play smaller game and smaller creatures. And that's where damage removal becomes more important, because you can deal with most played creatures. There's also a bit of unconditional removal. There's a bunch of things that kill artifact creature. I gave Disenchant as an example, but there is also the red, raise to the ground. They kill roughly 1/3 of the common and uncommon creature, and 40% of rares and mythics. As we'll see later, Disenchant is not as good as I possibly thought before the format has started. It's not looking like Destroy Evil was looking in Dominaria United. Then there's Shutdown, which has a slightly wider application because it also deals with the flying creatures. Flying creatures seem to be really good in this format, which should give some boost to Shutdown, but 4 mana is also quite a lot of mana for removal, so potentially a setback for the card. And there's Go for the Throat, which kills around 2/3. Obviously, this one kills 1/3, this one kills 2/3 of the common and uncommon creatures, 60% of the rares and mythics. Spoiler alert, numbers look good on Go for the Throat, so it seems like this is the number that is just enough, and those creatures are just important enough, and Go for the Throat is just cheap enough for it to be relevant for the format. Big graph, but I took like a bunch of removal spells. I didn't find every one of them, I think, but we can just look through them and how they look in this initial data, and mainly looking at which ones are looking good, and I think I'm going to make a cutoff at this 58%, and which ones look less good, and maybe surprisingly so. Now, keep in mind, all the enchantment and artifact removal spells are in this less good part that I arbitrarily set at 58%. We have a Disenchant here. We have Raise to the Ground. We have Shoot Down at 55. Disenchant is 57.3 and Raise to the Ground 56. So it looks like that artifact removal, at least in the early stage of the format, is not playing very well. Also the fight spells, Epic Confrontation at 56.9 and Bushwhack at 55.7, which is really surprising to me. This card looked so much better to me than this, and maybe it will increase as the format progresses. They don't look good. Goblin Firebomb, that card was speculated to be bad and is pretty bad, 48.8%. And slight surprise for me, Desynchronize, the 5 mana put thing on the top of the library, is not doing that well. So maybe worth noting. What is doing good? Well, Giggs' Command is doing good. It is a removal technically. The card is busted. Play it. 68% win rate is amazing. But what is good? Static Net. Despite Disenchants being in the format, Static Net is looking good. 63.3% win rate. It is the Oblivion, if in case you don't know yet. It is the Oblivion Ring for 4 mana. It also gives you 2 life and a Power Stone as it enters the battlefield. So that does really well. In the Trenches, that's a Glorious Anthem with a removal built in. That does really well, 62.3. Obliterating Bolt, as I mentioned, 61.1. And here we have the first common removal spell, Overwhelming Remorse, 60.9% win rate. That's a really high. In fact, it's the best black common so far. Overwhelming Remorse is the 5 mana instant exiled creature, but it gets cheaper for every creature card in your graveyard. So frequently it will cost 3. I played with it, and very often it was 2 mana because my deck was having a bit of self-mill. So that looks really good. Excavation Explosion, 60.7. So the same ballpark. These are the 2 prime common removals, Remorse and Explosion. Here we have Mightstone and Weakstone, which technically gives -5/-5 to something, so is technically removal. And it also is a double Power Stone, costs 5 mana, or potentially can draw you 2 cards. And still, it's only very, very marginally better than Unleashed Shell, the 5 mana red, technically clunky removal. But 59.3% win rate from Unleashed Shell, that doesn't tell clunky to me at all. That means that it's a key piece of cardboard in your red decks. And I would probably play 1 or 2 almost always. It seems like it aligns well with the format. I didn't mention in between Go for the Throat, 59.8 means very good. Always play it. It will be good. Surprise to me again, Prison Sentence. Those of you who watch more frequently know that I'm not a big fan of pacifism or arrest effects. This one looks good. It does arrest. It does do Scry 2 when it enters the battlefield, which is a small thing, but that small thing pushes it over the normal mediocrity of those arrest effects. Because even if they blow it out after that, you get some kind of a small benefit that you will be able to keep, so you didn't waste completely the cardboard, and they have to use the card to deal with it, which will usually not give them anything else. So you are slightly ahead on that exchange. Yes, the Unleashed Shell doing 2 damage to the face, as Industrial Strength mentioned, is very relevant. And I did win games because I had that extra 2 damage, basically to any target. Yeah, that did happen. Then we have Legions to Ashes, the black and white rare permanent removal, 59.2, so yeah, solid. Mishra's Command, another rare, 59%, solid. Corrupt at 58.4. First deck I drafted in the format was a mono black with 2 corrupts. Yeah, they're good. They are good. But you need to have the deck that is dedicated to it. I'm pretty sure that corrupted mono black decks and mono black decks with multiple corrupts are going to be way better than putting it in the deck that is even heavily black tinted, like maybe 12/5 land split. That might be not enough for corrupt to be very strong. Of note, Sibling Rivalry, unless I'm mistaken, it's the steal a creature until end of turn effect for this set, 58.1. I think that there is technology to deal with the stealing and sacrificing a creature in this format, so by all means you can play it. This figure at solid 58, and that's the sort of overview of the removal. I know I've realized when I was doing the graph that I forgot a couple, and I will look at them later, but for now this is pretty comprehensive overview. Of course, some of the removal spells don't have enough sample size yet to get the numbers, but that probably means that they are not so great. Of note, I did forget the blue enchantment removal. So I am going to quickly check it because that's an interesting one. Color blue, all decks, no, yes, all users, yes. Rarity, that's what I want, common. Game in hand win rate. Weakstone Subjugation, 56.9, so slightly lower. This might be something to do with generally blue being less good performing color for now. And the other one that I forgot was Deadly Riposte, and that has 54% game in hand win rate, so it is actually pretty poor. So I would avoid it unless unless a control white deck materializes at some stage. Power Stone Fracture. Ooh, that's a big omission. You're right. Power Stone Fracture is, if I'm off the top of my head, it was around 56 something. There we go, 56.4% win rate in game in hand. That's markedly lower. Again, this is the card that needs to be in the right deck, and I'm pretty sure that people play it badly because normally people start from the assumption that removal is good, and then the subtleties of the format come later. So I'm pretty sure that Power Stone Fracture will improve as the format progresses. Let's check. Can we see the top players' win rate with it? Top players' win rate with it, 60, which is not far from the top win rates for the black spells. So that makes me quite comfortable with the conclusion that it is a good removal. It just needs to be very careful about which deck you put it in. Right. Let's go back to the presentation slides. So I did a small feature on Twitter about the Milli Vanilla creatures. That's my own name. Don't judge me for that. But these are the creatures that either mill you and you get to draw a card from the cards that you milled, or are just slightly bigger vanilla creatures if you fail to find your target, because you can put a +1/+1 counter instead of getting the card in your hand. Now, it will be very fascinating to see if how good they are when you don't find anything or when you choose not to find something. But my general theory about it before the data was released, that these creatures will be as good as, at least big part of how good they are is going to be how good are the fail cases, in which, by fail case, I mean if you don't draw a card. So Eredith Chaplain is a 3-mana 1/1 flying. It mills 3 cards, and you can pick a plains or a creature with mana value 3 or less from those 3 cards. If you don't, you put a +1/+1 counter on the Chaplain. So if you fail, it becomes a 3-mana 2/2 flyer, which is a Winddrake. Nothing exciting, but nothing too bad. So finding a plains or a creature with mana value 3 or less is realistic, especially that the black and white theme is creatures with mana value 3 or less. So allegedly, it must be a supported thing. I speculated that because 2/2 flyer is not bad as a fail case, and because it has a high, possibly the highest of all those creatures success rate, it's pretty good. Falagi Archaeologist, that's a 2-mana 0/3, and it mills 3 cards. You may put a non-creature, non-land card from among those milled cards, and if you don't, you put a +1/+1 counter. So it can be 2-mana 1/4. It's not an exciting stat line for me, even in this format. Or it becomes an 0/3 and you have a spell. So sort of like a bad impulse that can only find spells that are not creatures. And leaves an 0/3 body instead of looking at 1 extra card. Not a big fan of decks that play that kind of thing, but it's potentially a powerful ability. I'm just worried that in the early format, it's going to be hard to find the right builds for that card, and this will maybe come later in the season when people will figure out how to build those type of decks. But my speculation before it was released was that this is going to be medium, very medium. Ravenous Gigamole, 4-mana 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, mill 3, blah, blah, blah. And this one looks for creature cards. So 4-mana 4/3/4 is not super exciting, but it's not bad. I mean, it's a big body. I think 3/4 aligns pretty well with this format. So that's to the favor of the Gigamole. But I probably would want to be keen on milling synergies if I play that card. So I don't want to play it in a deck where I don't have any kind of either recursion or return from your graveyard, or cards in the graveyard matter, that kind of stuff. I would want to have those synergies before I play the Gigamole, or I want to have like loads of creatures and basically make it almost infallible. Tomakul's Scrapsmith, 3 mana 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you mill 3 cards, and you may put an artifact card from among the cards milled this way into your hand if you don't put a +1/+1 counter on Tomakul's Scrapsmith. Now, Vanilla 3/2 is my least favorite stat line in Magic, I think. I really hate that stat line. I really, really dislike 3/2s, unless they do something marvelous. I like Organ Hoarder, it does marvelous things. Tomako Scrapsmith doesn't. It occasionally will become a 2/1 that draws me an artifact, but it seems that artifacts are not necessarily the high impact things. And also, it would require a dedicated red artifact deck, which I don't think there is one. I would be probably happier playing Tomaku Scrapsmith in something like Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, where I would be probably happy to play it and find some cheap artifact, because artifacts were super powerful in that particular mono red build. But this one I put as almost unplayable before the set was released, and data, spoiler alert, sort of confirms it. And then last we have Bluntwood Prowler. That's a 2 mana 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, mill 3. You can put a land card from among the cards milled this way into your hand, and if you don't, put a +1/+1 counter, so it becomes a 2/2. So I think that 2 mana vanilla 2/2 is not great, but it's something, and it gives you the opportunity of getting this extra land. I think that especially in best of one, being able to get those extra lands somehow is very important if you are going big mana, because the problem with the best of one is that you have the truncated distribution of lands in your opening hand. Like in best of 3, 80%, if you have 17 lands, 80% of your opening hands will have 2, 3, or 4 lands in them, which means that you will have like some chunk of the hands that will have more than 4 lands. In best of 1, 99% of the hands have between 2 and 4 lands in the opening hand, and that's a big difference. So it means that it's harder to get into 6 mana, for example, and that extra land from Bluntwood Prowler, if it's reliable enough, is a big step in the right direction. And even if it fails, you have this 2/2 that will maybe allow you to survive to the later game, because you have a blocker that can trade with something on the opponent's side that opponent plays an aggressive deck. So if you don't fail, you get your lands, you get quicker to your right numbers. If you don't, you get a 2/2. But also keep in mind, I told you there's plenty of X1 creatures in this format. So even that 1/1 body is not completely irrelevant, because you will find something to trade with, or something that will stop opponent from attacking, or maybe even force them to use like some sort of lower value removal on the Bluntwood Prowler, which is a win for you because you already got a land from it. So basically, opponent will have to 2-for-1 themselves in most cases. And as Isaiah MTG says quite correctly, if you whiff, you're still digging towards that land. So the chance of drawing a land in the next draw is higher, because you mill 3 non-lands off the top of your library. So your library is richer in lands, and therefore the probability of drawing a land is higher. So looking at the numbers of those cards, I did all the possible scenarios for Bluntwood Prowler. In a very particular case, if you're on the play, you have 17 lands in your deck, it's best of 1, and you play it on turn 2. And the result is that when you look at all those scenarios, so you could have had 4 lands in the opening hand, or 2 or 3. I rounded up. I didn't count those fringe scenarios of having fewer. And in your first draw step, you also have a chance of drawing a land. But the weighted average of all those scenarios is that you will hit 82.2% of the time, which is good. I mean, that means that most of the time you are going to get your land, and more than most of the time. Like you will get it 4 times, and you will miss 1, basically. And this is good enough for me. I think that it's a powerful card if you want to have more lands, if you're digging into more lands, or if you're like a cheeky person and try to skim on the lands because you have some cantripping artifacts and you only play 16, for example. You will still be able to potentially draw that third land. And that third land is what you need in your deck. If you put 16, you better be operational on 3 lands. So the other creatures, the archaeologist, the gigamole, and the scrapsmith, realistically you will have between 5 and, in extreme cases, 20 targets for the gigamole. I think that, archaeologists, you probably realistically look at 12 targets maximum, and scrapsmith, maybe you can get a 15 artifact deck or something. This is like an average chance. I didn't simulate all the scenarios because it was way too much simulating for my taste and for my time constraints. But if you have 5 targets for your spell in your deck, you will find it 1/3 of the time on average. If you have 8, 9, that's around 50% of hitting. If you go to 13, you get roughly 70, and 15 targets, you get 3/4 of the time you're going to hit. So as you can see, they will hit much less, realistically at least, which means that you have to make sure that you're happy with their fail cases, which means if you play archaeologist, you have to be happy to have a 1/4 on board. You don't want to play you don't want to play it in an aggressive tempo deck, because that doesn't progress your board early and later gives you body that you're not interested in. But if there is a control deck, you're quite happy playing the archaeologist. Gigamole, probably better, because I'm pretty sure you will easily have 16 targets for it. Isaiah, yeah, I found 1/4 to be fine against aggro. Pretty crap if they aren't. Well, yes, I think that this is the problem, that those blue decks that are the control ones, they will be maybe okay against aggro if they have the archaeologist, but against mid-range deck that have big bombs, big threats, that 1/4 body is absolutely useless. And your blue red or blue black control might just not have the tools to deal with those kind of decks. So Falaji archaeologist is definitely not helping with plans of dealing with it. So Gigamole is probably going to have, like, between 72 and 81% chance of hitting, which is okay. I think that this creature is going to be good, especially that it first signs of the format. It looks to me like black, maybe with green, they actually can get some sort of mill synergies in, and it remains to be seen how those things are going to be built. But there might be those decks that mill quite aggressively and hope that the opponents don't have Soulguide Lantern, which randomly hoses all those decks. And then Scrapsmith, again, I'm pretty sure if you want to play it, you better have those 10 artifacts plus, so probably you will have like 57-75% chance of hitting. And still, 3 mana 2/1 is not something I'm super happy with, basically. Isaiah, you haven't played black red, but you really want to. The one black red uncommon looks gas. Yeah, I had 3 of them in my trophy deck. They were good, I can tell you that, and they were the only non-purely red cards in my deck. I just splashed 3 of them, 3 of them into my red aggro, and it was great. Okay. Then we have the Airlift Chaplain. I expanded it slightly because here you can have almost a guarantee of hitting. Because you can play a mono white deck. I think mono decks are going to be a thing in this format. Maybe mono white is not the most obvious one, but I can see it happen. And then, of course, you have probably like 15 planes that you can hit, and probably like 12 creatures, so you can go even up to 27. You almost guarantee yourself a hit. I'm pretty sure that in most decks that play like 9 to 10 planes, So 8 to 9 targets for planes, because you need to have one to cast it. But 8 to 9 plus maybe 10, 11 creatures, you're going to get between like 19, 21 targets. So we're going to get like hit rates of 85, 89%. So highest of all those creatures. And that's good, because I think that you want to draw, you want to keep that 1/1 flyer, maybe you want to boost it somehow. So yeah, I think that generally the numbers are very much in favor of the airlift chaplain. But of course, theoretical numbers are nothing. They're not important. We're interested in the practical one. Oh, wait, sorry. That's one. I forgot I have this one. So because this one actually looks for two different types of cards, sometimes you have a choice between, do I pick a land or do I pick a creature? So I did a simulation for a deck with the 9 planes or 11 planes, and what are the odds of hitting both things, depending on how many creatures with mana value 3 or less you have in your deck. And with 9 creatures with mana value 3 or less, you get and 9 planes in the deck, you get a 21% of a chance to have a choice between the two. It's important because sometimes it's good to have choice. It of course will promote better players because they are better in making the right choice. But keep in mind that you will have that kind of flexibility at some stages. If you go up to 11 planes, you will have 25% of doing the same with 9 creatures. And it remains sort of steady-ish, it increases very slowly, the gap between 9 and 11 planes. But if you have 11 creatures, you get 25% of hitting with 9 planes and 30% with hitting with 11 planes. And it goes on and on and on like that. But there is a non-trivial chance of having that potential choice between the two. This is the chance of hitting both a planes and a creature. Yeah, keep it in mind. And this is the chance of hitting the creatures. But yeah, I mean, I think that people assume that with the Gigamole, you just basically 90% of the time draw a card, and it's actually very hard to have it at 90%. It will be more like 75 to 80. I think that very important is that Prowler 82.2 is, I think, good enough, because the fail case of a 2/2 is okay. So we have the first data, and keep in mind, every single thing is based on smaller than normal sample size, because we are 2 days in the format. There is a lot of it, and we'll be having more than 2,000 games in hand win rate sample size for most cards, or most commons at least. But it's still small sample sizes, and also early format is clunky. People still don't know what to do. They do the wrong thing. Some people are playing that are only playing in the first few days, which changes the win rates and blah, 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 so on. So mind that this data is not set in stone. It will change quite dramatically over the first 2 weeks. Card evaluation will change. Some cards will become less open and less abusable by the top players, and so on and so on. And I'm going to help doing that, because I will definitely talk about cards that are underdrafted, overdrafted, and should be changed. Real Pizza Hand asks, do you think Airlift is good right now because Aggro is good early on? Aggro is not necessarily good early on. It's not like a given. It's usually the decks that are the easiest to comprehend that are doing well early. And true, Aggro decks very often fill that gap. But for example, in Kaldheim, it was Aggro was not good early. Early in Kaldheim, all the Dirtly Snow decks were good. The ones with 5 colors and everything was snow, because the snowlands were so open. And if you had access to snowlands, you get so much edge on that, because the powerful synergies that were there were just amazing. And only after some time, when the general population started drafting snowlands higher, and the snowlands were not available at wheel anymore, then Aggro became good. And then when Aggro became good, it took some time for people to figure out, for example, the black-green elves, and that became really good at the end of the season. So it very much depends on what is great. Like in Midnight Hunt, blue blue-black tempo was good in the beginning. Because it was a straightforward deck that you could easily draft, and very important cards were wheeling for that deck, like Organ Hoarder or Drowned with the Dead, I think. So it's not a golden rule, but yes, aggro decks are usually easier to build in most formats. That's my you might see this kind of heuristic. It's not a universal rule though. So I think that there's like two groups of those melee vanilla creatures. Airlift Chaplain, Blanchwood Prowler, and Ravenous Gigamole all have a quite close win rate. Mine, Ravenous Gigamole, does it by being a 4-drop, which is quite surprising. I wasn't thinking that this is going to be as good as it is. Blanchwood Prowler, really solid, 58.3% win rate. Airlift Chaplain, 58.8%, very close to each other. And then we have a lower tier. These are cards that are below par for now. And I think that there is a hope for Falagi Archaeologist as the format progresses, because the decks that it will naturally be good in are going to be much more difficult to conceptualize. And these are not the first week decks. These are the decks when you have a stable metagame. So after like 2 weeks, you can start attacking the metagame because people's pick orders are more or less stable since then. So my prediction would be that this card would be improving. Oh, good NCAA that you're here. Okay, that's a good note. NCAA marks that Archaeologist is a very good opening hand win rate, which is consistent with the fact that it's a good stopper for the aggressive decks and maybe later just a menial body. And especially that, it doesn't guarantee the hit even in the late game. So that's the problem with it. Tomakul Scrapsmith, 54.8, and I don't think that it will improve very much. I think that this card is just the poorest of the five, and the data so far confirms it. Let's hope that it will stick, because otherwise I'll look like a buffoon again. So let's look at the metagame. This is shaping to be a 2-color format. I can instantly see that it's like 90% of the decks are 2 colors. 6% of the decks are monocolor or monocolor with splash. For the first time, I've seen actually in the 17 lands data, there was one deck that didn't have a color. It was colorless deck with a splash. So probably it was a colorless deck that had 2-3 cards of one color, which is quite interesting that someone managed to put so many artifacts. There is some amount of 3-color decks and 3 colors and splash, not that many. There was a couple of 4-color decks, but really they were too little to even show you the numbers on those. They did arguably have high win rates. And yeah, I think that NCAA claims that they play multicolor decks more than anything, or are you just forcing mono NCAA? As I said, my first draft was mono black, but I didn't see myself playing 3 colors yet. I've seen some people play 3 colors though. Okay, let's hide that one. But yeah, it looks like it's going to be a 2-color format quite clearly. It clusters together with all the other 2-color formats that we had in the last years. Arguably, this one will have more monocolor than the previous one, so keep that in mind. Okay, so NCAA plays monocolor, mono red, and mono green. Okay, we got it. That's where it's at. So the win rates: monocolor decks 55% win rate, monocolor and splash 54.6, 2-color decks 56.8, and this is the peak. 2-color decks have the highest win rate and the highest sample size as well. 2 colors and splash 55.1, 3-color 54.8, and 3 colors and splash 49.3. So there's a big drop with 3 colors and splash. Also, pretty small sample size. Keep that in mind. Generally, the peak performance is 2 color decks for this format, but again, that will vary very much by people. I'm pretty sure that some people are going to be forcing monocolor decks much more frequently, and I assume that NCAA, your win rate is slightly above the average by probably 20 percentage points or something. Yeah, 72% win rate. Yeah, you're fine. You can do your monocolor shenanigans. You know how to do it. But remember, NCAA is a professional. Don't try this at home, or at least don't expect to have 72% win rate drafting monocolor at home. But definitely draft red, by the way. Let's look at the color pairs by frequency. Most drafted so far is Rakdos. I think to the point where it's overdrafted. And red bars are pure Rakdos, and blue bars are Rakdos and Splash. So if you want to have the full, you need to add those up. Second most popular, Azorius, 11.2 in pure and 2.1 in splashed version. Then we have Golgari, 10.8 and 2.7 of the splash. So Golgari seems to be the color combination when people try to put splashes and more colors. So this sort of black-green base for multicolor decks. Dimir, 9 and 2.5. Again, quite a lot of splashing in Dimir. Then we have Orzhov, and that's a big drop. So basically these 4, Rakdos, Azorius, Golgari, and Dimir are the most drafted archetypes for now. And the other ones are markedly lower than that, but not too low. There's no archetype that is almost not drawn. The lowest numbers are for Izzet, and it's like 7.5%, when you would expect 10% based on how many color combinations they are. These are only frequencies for 2 color decks. Yep. So I don't count the mono and 3 colors for that particular statistics. So we have Orzhov with 7.2 and 1.2. Boros 6.6, 1% splashing. So Boros rarely splashes almost 3 times less than Golgari does. Same with Izzet, 6.4% pure and 1.1% with a splash. And then we have Gruul, 6.3 and 1.6, Selesnya, 6.3 and 1.8, and Simic. Every single format that there is, I think Simic is the lowest drafted deck. And I'm starting to think that WotC really has a Simic problem in terms of design. There's been good formats for Simic, like Midnight Hunt. Simic was, I think, one of the 2 most winningest archetypes. Still, people didn't draft it because somehow they make Simic really convoluted to get to a good build, and then few people want to go into that. Which is good news if you want to specialize in Simic drafting. You will probably have it more open than average. But yeah, there we go. It's also the part of it is that when you have a Simic base, it's very frequently quite easy to add a 3rd color. So, well, they could just balance by giving good gold card, but quite frequently the gold cards for Simic are just not that great. Well, there was Risen Reef, but apart from that, well, I did play against Simic Madness. If that was your first competitive deck, I'm qualified for a Pro Tour by mercilessly beating on the Blue-Green Madness. So, color pairs by win rate. Boros, number 1, 59.4% win rate. And this is, again, something that we see time and time again. Boros has an insanely high win rate as a 2-color combination. This, by the way, takes into account both the pure 2-color decks and the ones with a splash. And it's weighted, of course. So 59.4% win rate for Boros, 58.7% for Gruul. And this is like the first 2 tiers of the 2-color decks, basically, Boros and Gruul. Then there's Izzet, slightly lower at 57.9. Top 3 color combinations all have red. That's something for you to keep in mind. Then there's Azorius, 57.3, Golgari, 56.6. So in the first 5 combinations, we have all colors represented, but not equally. 3 red archetypes, 2 blue archetypes, only 1 black, 2 green, and 3 red. So basically, you have slightly more red, slightly less black. But it's the same with Gruul. A real pizza hand is asking, what do you make of Izzet being number 3 in win rate but low on play percentage? So if you look back, Gruul and Izzet roughly same play levels. Gruul slightly more because of the splashing, but they have quite high win rates. I think that part of the good win rate is they're underdrafted. Specifically, red is being underdrafted. So yeah, I think that part of those win rates is red is particularly open, and I'm pretty sure it will not be open in 2 weeks. So this is the moment to play those decks, which makes me again think that there is a good chance that Azorius will slightly go up after 2 weeks, as people will be higher on red, because they will be higher on red. Necessarily, black and white, I think, will be more open, and we might see slightly better results for those. Is it the right time? Yes. Is it? It is. Good one. I appreciate that. Mainly because I don't have to make that joke. So yeah, Azorius Golgari 57.3, 56.6, 56.5 for Rakdos, which Rakdos seems to be a victim of black being overdrafted. Because red is open, we know that, and red is strong, and Rakdos looks like a strong combination, which probably means that black is slightly overdrafted, and because black being slightly overdrafted, Rakdos decks don't come together. They're super synergy based, so you want to have the right mixture of cards from both colors if you want to play it, and you just don't get access to those. Then Demir 54.6, Selesnya 55.2, Orzhov 54.4, and Simic 53.5. So Simic is underdrafted, and in this case, also underperforming, which is not a good indicator for the future of Simic decks. However, there is always the case that Simic decks are hard to build. They will not come together in the first week because you need to know exactly which cards you want, and sometimes just putting those couple of extra cards that you don't put in the first week are going to change quite a lot how you play. Done. So I have the last-ish part of the seminar. I'm going to be talking about win rates of cards. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm just going to focus on the top card, the hidden gem, and by hidden gem, in some cases, it's the card that has a high win rate in the particular color, but is picked quite late. In some cases, it's just the second card because in some categories there was just not enough of high winning cards that they would find a gem. So that was the problem. Hey, Mad Moses, thank you for the raid. Always a pleasure. Yeah, how was your stream? Hope it was good. We're just finished our grueling climb through the metagame and how this format looks like. So far, just to give you a recap, 2-color format with some larger than normally number of monocolor decks. 2-color decks are doing the best. Going up with colors seems to be not so beneficial. Playing mono is acceptable, and people in the chat showed that they did it. Most played deck Rakdos. Best decks seem to be Boros, Gruul. Is it mainly because red seems to be open in the first days? Again, data based on 2 days, so keep in mind sample size is not exactly the biggest. So now we're going to talk about top cards, and it's going to be colors, commons and uncommons in each color, plus some artifacts, and then the last things, I'm going to talk about the signpost uncommons a bit. Okay. That's an interesting thought. So chronic, I'm gonna chat about it when I come to the Power Stone Engineer, but let's start with the Scrapwork cohort. And this is a surprise to me in a way. Like, I didn't anticipate it before the format started, but I played a bit, and this card was such a pain to deal with. The fact that it leaves those random 1/1s is mighty annoying. The 3/1 body is trading with quite a lot of the stuff. And then you get it back, and you get another one of those 1/1s that stopped me from killing my opponent a couple of times. And it was very hard to raise that card against an aggressive shell. So, and also, it looks like a 4-drop, but so often this is the only thing I can spend my Power Stone mana on. So it realistically costs 2 mana very frequently, and a 2 mana 3/1 that makes a 1/1 is really, really good. And if you have any artifact fall triggers, then yes, of course, it's good. But 60.7% game in hand win rate, really solid. That's another surprise for me, the Aeronaut Cavalry. God, I always mixed up cavalry. No, cavalry is when you take a cross up the mountain. Cavalry is when you go on a horse and charge. A 3/4 flyer in this format seems to be good. That's it. The fact that it puts a +1/+1 counter almost on in any deck, not even only in the blue-white, because there's plenty of soldiers hidden everywhere, is a plus. Really solid numbers for 2 days already. 59.7% game in hand win rate. I will definitely start picking this card higher. I also lost to it in my pre-release, even though I had like a really bomb-laden pool. So it was slightly annoying that I lost to it, but I lost to it, and that made me notice the card much more closer. So these 2 cards look absolutely stellar. Cavalry is also not picked very highly. So yeah, don't sleep on the cavalry. Start picking it slightly higher, or start making sure that you put it in your deck. Yeah, 5 mana 3/4 flyer is a boomer card, but maybe it's a boomer format. It's coming back to the times of Urza and Mishra. What's more boomer than that, Brothers War? Now, Power Stone Engineer seems to have a slightly lower win rate than I would expect. It's a 2-drop that dies into a Power Stone, 2-drop, 2/1. Chronic 33 wrote, I found Power Stone Engineer to be good in Rakdos Splash White. White doesn't make that good use of Power Stones. And that might be the problem, that you basically make that Power Stone and just like extra piece of cardboard that you don't have a good use for. That's why maybe Scrapwork Cohort is decent, because you can find some use for those Power Stone. Something all the small creatures in white have keywords. I wonder if Cavalry is helping those get better. Example, a 2/2 lifelinker is much better than the 1/1. It's very, very, very possible. Putting it on random creatures with abilities is going to be quite useful, especially flying or even vigilance. Top cards in white, uncommons. Like, first of all, I want to mark that there is maybe, and I'm going to look at it specifically. There is 3 good white uncommons, and I think that this is a part of the weakness of the color. There's Static Net, the card that I showed. Is a top uncommon. It's like really insane win rate. 63.3 is exceptionally good. Very easy to splash as well, so keep that in mind. Then the Hidden Gem, which is not very well hidden. It's still a highly picked card. It has a smaller alpha than the other top cards. That's why I picked it. Is the Recruitment Officer. I listened to a podcast about Constructed, and they said that this is basically like the 1 mana Flash Spirit that you can tap 4 and draw a card. Because that's exactly what it is. It's a 1-drop, quite aggressively statted. And later in the game, when you can't attack with it anymore, it will just draw you some cards on occasion. So yeah, great combo. High win rate, 61%. And the other good card in white is the 7 mana artifact, the 3/3 double striker that draws a card at ATB. And that's it. That's basically it. All the other uncommons have a huge drop off instantly. Like, just to give you an impression, Combat Thresher, the 7 mana 3/3 double striker, has a 60.6% win rate, and number 4, Mass Production, 55.5. So there's a 5 percentage point difference between the top 3 and the rest, and the fourth, which makes me think that white is really shallow at the uncommon level. The trap, Lauren, Disciple of History, 4 mana 3/3 legendary creature. When it or another legendary creature you enters the battlefield under your control, return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Very disappointing numbers on it. It's just like returning an artifact is not the same as being a Gravedigger, and keep that in mind. I thought that the card would be slightly better. I know that there won't be many legends in your legendary creatures in specific in your decks, because this is no longer Dominaria United. But yeah, game in hand win rate 53.3 is pretty low. Like, that's shockingly low, actually, when you think about it. So yeah, especially that the card is picked quite highly, you might want to reevaluate it. Doesn't work as well as promised. Blue has slightly lower win rate in general. Like, look, top card in white 60.7, top card in blue 59.4, and it's Combat Courier, something I did not expect to be that good. But I guess you play it as a 1-drop. You do 2 points of damage, sacrifice it, draw a card, maybe even prevent like 3 damage through that, and then you can unearth it and draw a card instantly at some stage of the game when you have enough mana. The fact that the sacrifice is colorless, you can utilize Power Stones to do that. Seems good, but 59.4 is very surprising, to me at least. But keep in mind that this is by far the best blue common. Milestone Animation, 57.1%, is third on that list. It's a good card. 57.1 is decent, but if that's the third best blue common, that's quite far from everything, and it drops off very, very rapidly. Milestone Animation, I'm pretty sure that the card's win rate will improve because people will learn how to play it with it properly. I think that there might be a case of people playing it too optimistically and just basically getting blown out by not waiting a couple of turns with it. Because if you play it well, it is a 4/4 haste and draw a card. But if you play it badly, it's, oh no, they spent 1 mana to not only slow me down, but also 2/1 me. The trap I selected is Wing Commando. It doesn't have like a terrible win rate, but it's picked really, really, really high compared to the other cards that have the same kind of win rate. So the ALSA for Wing Commando is 4.8. The ALSA for Combat Courier is 5.8. The ALSA for Milestone Animation is 6.6. ALSA, for those of you that don't know, is the average last seen as, which is sort of proxy for how do arena users like a particular card. The lower the number, the more they like it. So 1, you never see it unless you open it. And if the higher it goes, the bigger the chance that it will wheel, for example. Feed the Goblin Blast Runners. Is the Goblin Blast Runner the 1 mana 1/2 that gets +2/+0 and Menace until end of turn? I'm pretty sure it is. In terms of uncommons, that's even poorer than white was. So white had 3 good uncommons. Blue has 2, and both of them are on the slide. There's Stop Their Mechanics, 63.5, great card, fantastic card. When you draw a second card each turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. When it dies, create a 1/1 Thopter. So you always have like some kind of a benefit from it, because you get a flyer if they kill it. If they don't kill it, it becomes quickly quite big and can apply some proper pressure. And Zephyr Sentinel, 2 mana, flash. Sorry, flash flying. I mean, that's already great. 2 mana with flash and flying. It's a soldier, so it has types, but also when it comes to the battlefield, you can return up to, so you don't have to, but you can return up to 1 target creature you control to its owner hand. If it was a soldier, put a +1/+1 counter on Zephyr Sentinel. My second draft this season, I played Zephyr Sentinel to return the 4/5 red dragon that my opponent targeted with removal. So not only I managed to save it from removal, but then I got my second enter the battlefield trigger with it, dealing 4 damage. It was great. It felt really good. And I won the game thanks to that because, well, basically I needed a dragon to win. That's why I didn't play out the Sentinel earlier, because I thought that better plan to protect my bomb. And then there is a drop of like after Zephyr Sentinel, the next game in hand win rate card is Spotter Thopter, the 8 mana 4/5 flyer that can be a 2/3 flyer for 4 mana, and it scries X when X is its power at ETB. But that one is already 57.5, so there's a big drop off in game of hand win rate. And a trap that I found is the Hulking Metamorph. So it's a 9 mana 7/7, but it also can be a 4 mana 3/3. And it gains abilities of a card that you control. Yeah, people, as someone in chat, Blackwater Sunset mentions, it quite often isn't just a 4 mana 3/3 flyer, but it's a 4 mana with 2 pips in it, which is quite a price to pay. Because, you know, if you have a flying creature, you can just basically copy the ability of the flying creature. And yeah, Blackwater Sunset remarks that probably people try to play the 9 mana version too hard, and it's easily blown up even at this 9 mana option. I think that this card has potential, but you probably need to build more carefully, and maybe you should be more content playing it on curve as something rather than waiting forever. Hi, Eric. Eric Infinite Breakfast. In the chat, I must have fallen for the trap. If that is the case, I've been liking the card. Look, I don't think it's a bad card on principles. I just think that it may be badly played in the first weeks. So I'm pretty sure that the win rate of that one will improve. But I wanted to note that this is a very highly picked card. And has a pretty abysmal win rate for now, at least. It's not an assembly worker, is it? The shapeshifter doesn't mean that it has changeling. In this set, at least. Right. Black. Well, the top common is Overwhelming Remorse. 60.9% win rate. Excellent. Speculated that this card is going to be great. And it is great, it seems. Will be very frequently 3 mana, 2 mana exile target creature or planeswalker, which is great. So no need for talking about it, especially that we talk about removal specifically. The hidden gem of black is that I selected is Gix's Caress. That's the 3 mana coercion variant. And it is the second best black common so far in terms of win rate. So probably better than most people anticipated. I thought that the card is going to be solid, maybe like upper middle of the pack, but it looks like it's better, at least for now. I don't know how many copies are too many. yet, Med Moses, but I'm pretty sure you can play 2 if you have ways of using Power Stones. If you don't have ways of using Power Stones, probably play just 1. But yeah, you have to make sure that you have 2 drops or something, that you can play a turn 3 this and not get behind. So you either want to play a 2 drop to stabilize the board slightly, or you want to play a 5 drop on turn 4 because you played Gix's Caress and you ramped yourself to it. So that's, I think, the way to use the card. But it seems 59.7% win rate. It's quite easy to get something. Yeah, it's to remove the haymakers from the opponent, to get to snag the removal. I think like big part of this format is that removal is really strong. Removal has really high win rates, and getting rid of that removal from opponents' hands is ruining the strategy, because without removal, this format is really hard to deal. I think with several types of cards, and often, if you play something that is black with big things, you might keep it for the later game, play it, make sure you remove that removal, play your big thing, and you know that you're free. If you see that there's multiple removals, play a decoy card that sort of they need to remove, but don't play your best one, and you can win the game like that. I think that being able to play this and then ramping into a 5 drop and that stabilizes you is one of the options. Yeah, exactly, Bond to King. Take the bomb or the things that deals with your bomb. The card that is underperforming, and I put it as a trap question mark, because I don't know if they are traps yet. They just have an early low win rate. Gixian Skull Flyer. Skull Flare? Yeah, there we go. Phyrexian Human Assassin. 3 mana, 2/3, and at the beginning of upkeep, if there are 3 or more creature cards in your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Gixian Skullflayer. I played against this card a lot, and it was sort of like annoying, but you always manage to deal with it, and that's the important part of it. I think that's the problem with it, and it leads to bad kind of play patterns, like when you try to wait in a deck that doesn't have time to wait. I found it, because I was playing against this with my deck that was having a lot of late game, and my opponents were just like playing this, waiting a bit. They couldn't attack because it was too small. Then they had to somehow fill their graveyard, which was beneficial for me because they went for trades that I wanted. And then finally, when they switched on this card, I just dealt with it easily, and it never did anything. And the win rate sort of confirms it. I'm pretty sure that there is going to be some Golgari decks that can turbo it out, and you can mill quite a lot. You play turn 2 Bluntwood Prowler, mill some creatures, get the land, play turn 3 this, and turn 4 Gigamole or something, and maybe you get to those 3 creatures in the graveyard. But is it worth that? Isn't it better to play a better 3 drop instead? Isn't it better to play Gix's Caress and make sure you get a good deal out of it? I'm pretty sure it is. Uncommons. And this was a big surprise to me. I'm not kidding. Ashnod's Harvester, at the top black uncommon, 60.7% win rate. It's a 3/1 for 2 mana artifact creature that whenever it attacks, exile a target card from a graveyard, and it has Unearth for 2 mana. So it seems that targeting graveyard is a pretty powerful ability in this format. Now, of course, you have to keep in mind it's still early days, and the sample sizes are not majestic, but we're talking here about 1,800 games for the Ashnod's Harvester to get that win rate. So yeah, 60.7 is quite high. Just to give you an impression, number 2 is Go for the Throat, the removal, and that has 59.8% game and win rate. And number 3 of the black uncommons is, well, it's 2 cards really, but is Corrupt with 58.4. I put it as a hidden gem because there's a slightly lower alpha, slightly higher alsa, which means that we'll go slightly late. Real Pizza Hand, my first draft in the format was mono black with 2 corrupts, and it didn't trophy. But yeah, I got a lot of mana flood in a couple of games, and that was the reason. And I should have picked more card draw in those decks, especially the one that you can pay 2 life draw to cards, because with a couple of corrupts I can easily bounce back my life. But the highlight of that game, of one of the games, was opponent playing this. Is it 5 mana golem from the retro archive that makes 2 copies of itself? But when I target the main golem, it targets every single other golem with the same spell, and I played Corrupt for 8 into the first golem and gained 24 life. So yeah, that was fun. But Corrupt is great, but make sure you build it correctly. I think that Corrupt should always be in a mono shell. Really, this card you want to be mono, or you want to have cards that enable it. We're going to talk about it in a second. But I don't think it's very difficult to, if you have a Corrupt early, let's say pick 4, you see Corrupt, snap pick, and then try to build yourself around a black deck. And if you can't, take the Flask or whatever it's called, that turns everything into a swamp, because then you can play Corrupt and then hopefully still manage to kill your opponent. But the card is really powerful. It just requires a bit of building around. Elsewhere Flask, yeah, that's the one. Which is a good card in the black deck anyway, because it's a draw a card artifact that you can sacrifice later as a sacrifice trigger, or you can sacrifice to ability because you drew a card from it already, so it's pure upside for you. The trap that I found was the Battlefield Butcher. I was high on this card before the format was released. I thought it was pretty strong. 5 mana, 3 mana, 1/4, and 5 mana tap. Each opponent loses 2 life. It costs 1 less to activate for each creature card in your graveyard. It's a good body, 1/4 for 3 mana, it seems, and it aligns with the format, it seems, but somehow it just doesn't do enough. I think that it probably people are afraid of blocking with it because they're afraid of being blown out by a combat trick, and because of that, it just serves as an enchantment-ish thing that can drain 2 life. And maybe people block too frequently with it, and tricks are real. I don't know exactly, but something doesn't align with it. And probably there is just enough of incidental graveyard hate that it can have a problem. And also, possibly, if that becomes an issue, people can kill it quite easily. Sorry, I have a bit of a cough. Top red common, Scrapwork Mutt. Did anyone have that on their list of top red commons? I mean, I knew it's a good card. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I knew it's a good card. But it turns out to be amazing. Like 61.7% win rate. That's a lot. And red has quite high win rates in general. It seems like the strongest color because it's underdrafted. So don't think that red is the strongest color in point. It is a strong color. I think that large part of the success of red is that it's wide open. 2 mana colorless Ramager is surprisingly good for fixing hand. That's true. And the late in the game, it just basically draws a card because you just get rid of a land. So it's, dare we say it, a Mull Drifter. This is just Mull Drifter. So that's the top common. Just to give you the impression of other good commons in red. We have Excavation Explosion, which is just behind Scrapwork Mutt. And we have Penregan Strongbull. Again, over 60% win rate. And really, really high alsa. This card wheels probably like 60% of the time. But still, Penregan Strongbull didn't make my list of the hidden gems because Goblin Blast Runner has an even higher alsa, which means this card almost always wheels, and it has almost 60% win rate, which is insane and will not last for long. So while you can do it, just get on the Goblin Blast Runner train And make sure play as many as you can, have some sacrifice synergies, and boom, voila, there is your deck. Turning free 1-drops into 3/2 menace creatures will win games, especially when you have things to support them, and attacking with like 1-drop 3/2 menace and playing the +2/+0 first strike trick on it when the opponent is forced to block it is going to lead to some massive blowouts. The trap for the color Blitz Automaton, because it's very highly picked and it doesn't have impressive numbers. 56.1 is not terrible. It's just about average. But considered the alpha of the card, which is blah, 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 5.5, and considering Penregan Strongbull has 7.5, so whole 2 picks later, and that Scrapwork Mutt, the top red common, has more or less the same kind of alpha as the 56% win rate card. Now that makes me think it is highly overvalued for now, at least. Let's go. Blackwater Sunset. Does red have sacrifice, or do you need to be Rakdos? Now, as Industrial Strength mentioned, there is the Strongbull, which is just good enough. But B, there are things like Evolving Wilds, triggers on it, so keep in mind. There is plenty of the retro-framed uncommons, like the Star, and there is the Flask, and bunch of Soul Guide Lantern. All those things easily sacrifice and trigger it. You just need to trigger it in the right times. You don't need to trigger it every single turn. But yeah. Oh, the bubble. No, Jordan, there is no bubble. This is hilarious. If you didn't know, by the way, Wizards sort of forgot to put Mishra's bubble in the draft boosters. And Mishra bubble was opened 0 times so far in 17 lands. Yay. They claim that they know about the issue and they're going to fix it. So, yeah. The real hidden gem. It's so well hidden that no one can find it. Which, it is a big change in the format, because you will get those couple of bubbles in some decks, making it much more strong. Yeah, the black-red uncommon with the goblin is great, and of course it's going to be better in the black-red, but it does not have to be only in the black-red. I'm pretty sure you can play it in the mono-red with the artifact synergies that there are, and plenty of artifacts can be sacrificed quite easily. Let's move on. Oh, another card that you can sacrifice in mono red, the hidden gem, Mishra's Research Desk. Giant Cindermaw is the top uncommon, 63.3. That's a very high win rate. I played with the card. It's phenomenal. It wins games, because I played it and then my opponent started casting those 6/5 artifacts that gain life, and they were doing nothing, and amazing. Jordan, I played Evolving Wilds in my mono black because I couldn't decide if I want to play 15 or 16 lands. So I just put Evolving Wilds for the other sacrifice things. I think it's fine to play Evolving Wilds in the mono deck because it allows you to filter, and that's still worth it. And if you have some sacrifice synergies, it's just absolutely perfect. Right, let's look at the red uncommons. Red uncommon roster looks pretty deep, so you have like at least 6 good uncommons, or 5 good uncommons in those colors. But Cindermaw is definitely clearly the best. Horn's Stone Seeker, the 2-mana 2/2 menace, make a power stone, and that sacrifice that if it dies, is close behind. And then there is Obliterating Bolt in number 3 in terms of the top uncommons. But Cindermaw is the first one. Look at it. 3 mana, 4/3 trample, and players can gain life, which is not just a trinket text. So quite cool. The hidden gem is Mishra's Research Desk, because that's the card that people might sleep on still. It has ALSA of 6.3, which means it wheels probably around 40% of the time right now, and it shouldn't because the card is good. Oh, that's a good one. Lots of top cards being unearthed creatures and trap cards being prototype creatures makes me wonder whether that's mainly because the unearthed creatures are the better cards or because the prototype creatures are generally picked very highly at the moment. I think it's both. The unearthed creatures and the unearthed spells in general look really strong. Like they have really strong numbers. The fact that you can unearth using the power stones is great. The fact that you can cast them using power stone is great because they will allow you to double spell very frequently if you have a couple of power stones on board. So yeah, they're really strong. While they are giving you enough value, most of them, that you disenchanting them doesn't give you any like value. Prototypes very frequently are just dumb. These are the cards that are you play it, they kill it. Oh well, we won for one, but I spent 2 mana on my thing, and you spent 7 mana on your thing. You're behind on mana on that exchange quite a lot. So one prototype that we saw in the presentation early as we didn't see it actually, but we talked about it was the white uncommon, the 7 mana 3/3 double striker that draws a card instantly because it draws a card, so it gives you something on ATB. Doesn't become a dumb card. This is a very heavy, so far at least in the early days, very heavy removal centric format, and dumb things are not particularly good in the removal heavy formats because you play a dumb thing, it gets killed, you're behind on the exchange because you spent 9 mana. So yeah, here we see another prototype thing being a sort of trap, and another unearthed thing being a hidden gem. Which are just sort of as someone said quite correctly, sort of like experimental synthesizer with some interesting usage of it. Hey Migusho, I'm sorry I didn't do top 20, but rest assured you're in top 20 all-time trophies on 17 lands. So yeah, the trap for that color combination in uncommons is the Falaji Dragon Engine, 8 mana 5/5 flyer. For 2 mana, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. And again, big dumb thing that doesn't do much. I'm pretty sure it might be a decent card played just as a 3 mana 1/3 and maybe like slowly pinging the opponent. Depends on how many power stone you have to actually pump it. But you play it for 8 mana, and again, if opponent has removal, just like straight up, you're down on mana on that exchange. Green, top common, Gaia's Gift. Hey, this is our combat trick of the format so far. Gaia's Gift, 2 mana, instant +1. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains reach, trample, hexproof, and indestructible until end of turn. Now, this card just does what you want. It's the same as Take Up the Shield from Dominaria United, the same as Feat of Resistance in M21, was it? So yeah, just very good combat trick for 2 mana that does a lot to help you win those combat games. I still think, didn't draft it yet because I didn't have the right pod, but I still think that there is the red-green combat tricks prowess deck in this format, and Gaia's Gift is going to be a very important part of it. Still goes relatively late, so you can have access to it, and don't sleep on that. Alsa of 7 wheels 50-60% of the time as a rule of thumb. It has a 60.5% win rate. Hidden Gem is Burrowing Razor Maw. I don't know exactly in which deck it goes, but it has 1,000 games played, which is not an extremely large sample size. Argothian Opportunist, the guy that makes Power Stone, or actually, no, it's a Gal. An Argothian that makes a Power Stone, the 3/2, has the win rate of 59.2, but it has a 5.5 times higher, larger sample size. But yeah, 4-2 is a beatdown card, and also I guess the mill synergies might do something in the late game for you. Yeah, but 3 mana 4-2 is just a lot of power on the board. And the trap, well, if it isn't a Rust Goliath, a 10 mana 10/10 with reach and trample. Dumb thing, doesn't do anything on ETB and costs a lot of mana and dies to disenchant. Again, no bueno. These cards are just not working in this format, it seems. Time and time again, we see those cards. Underperforming. And just to give you another comparison, the Boulder Branch Golem, the 7 mana 6/5 that gains life equals to its power at ETB. This one has 58.8% win rate because it does something at ETB. So even if the opponent uses the removal on them, you'll gain 6 life. So you're not behind on that thing. I think that this format is like vanilla creatures are just not good enough. Talking about non-vanilla creatures, here we have Obstinate Baloth, 4 mana 4/4, gains 4 life at ETB. There you go, not the vanilla. And if someone discards it, put it onto the battlefield instead of putting it into your graveyard. I don't think it will come be important at any stage in this format, but just the 4/4 that gains 4 life for 4 is good enough, 60.6% win rate. Yeah. And the hidden gem, if NCAA is still in the chat, yeah, we nailed it with Jason in the previous season. We were disputing this particular card, and it turns out it's good. At least initially, it has a 60.6% win rate, equal with the Baloth, and is picked much less than the Baloth is. It's a 2 mana artifact. For X, you can sacrifice it and make an XX golem, and you can unearth it, so you can basically cast a X-3 creature, where X is the number of mana you have access to. Again, using Power Stones, which is quite useful, I think, because it's a very good thing for those Power Stones. And I think, it can play out like you play it on some turn, and you play a 5/5, and then you wait a couple of turns, and you play on like another 5/5 or something. And the surprising trap for this color at uncommon level is Bushwhack. I thought that this card is going to be great. It looks like it's not. Fight spells are in general underperforming, as I showed you in the removal section of the seminar. And Bushwhack is particularly underperforming. It's only 55.7% win rate, and it's a very high pick. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's that. In interesting points, Baloth and Mask of the Jade Crafter are really standout uncommons for green. So again, all the colors don't have that a long bench in terms of how quality are their uncommons. Over 60% win rate. We have 3 in white, 2 in blue, 1 in black only, but black has a pretty decent 59-58% win rate card, so that's different. Then we have 3 in red and 2 in green. And then there's a big drop because third green uncommon, Alloy Animist, the one that can animate artifacts, 58% win rate. So 2.5 percentage point lower than the Mask and the Baloth, whatever. We are left with the artifacts, and they do badly. I mean, top artifact, Energy Refractor, 56.5. That's barely the average of 17 lines user. I do like my Refractor, but the numbers are not great. partially because it's played in everything, so it will be played in wrong decks for it quite frequently, I'm pretty sure. One card that I said maybe a hidden gem, supply drop, 3 mana flash. When it enters the battlefield, target creature you control gets +2/+2. And then you can sacrifice it to draw a card. It's clunky, but it's late picked and has one of the better win rates for colorless common artifacts. And a big trap, a stone retrieval unit, 4 mana 2/3 makes a power stone, is just not good. It's too slow. Like, keep in mind the green 3/2 for 3 has a 58% win rate. So adding 1 mana to that ability and removing a bit of aggression is a big problem. Yeah, just makes it complicated. And 2/3 is just too small for that price. Yeah, I think you're right. In terms of uncommon artifacts, Reconstructed Thopter, better than I expected. 3 mana, 2/1 flyer with Unearth, 58.2% win rate. So, yeah, not bad at all. Hidden Gem, Levitating Statue. It has only 56% win rate, so it's not super great, but it's an uncommon colorless card. I think that once people start animating it, that becomes pretty good, because if you play the animating aura on the levitating statue, it becomes like a 5/5 flyer with haste that draws a card. So that's pretty good. I mean, obviously it will become a big target for the next removal, but if you manage to play it in the right timing and you know that you're not going to be blown out, you at least draw a card from the other thing and you smash for 5. And maybe if you played some spells earlier, for more. So think about that little mini combo. 56, decent. I'm going to play with that card a lot. Yeah, I'm going to play with the card a lot, and it's just going to be my downfall in terms of gem. The trap, Steel Exemplar, 5 mana, 4/4 trample. If you only spend mana of 1 color or 0 colors, it becomes a 6/6. Sorry. 6/6 with trample. But of course, it's still a dumb creature that doesn't do anything on ETB, which might be its problem. And not in every deck. But I'm pretty sure that later in the format, we will see some kind of monocolor decks that can actually use it efficiently. Remains to be seen. And top retro cards, I'm only looking at the uncommons. Chromatic Star is the best one of them all, 58% win rate. It's really solid for 1-drop artifact. It fixes your mana. It draws your card. It has sacrifice synergies. It has draw 2 cards synergies. It has artifacts enter the battlefield synergies. Like, lots of things. That's definitely the golden egg of the format, albeit at uncommon level. But I mean, really solid card. The fact also that you have to keep in mind is that you draw a card if it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield. So you can sacrifice it to any other effect, and you still get the draw effect. And Hidden Gem is the Elsewhere Flask. This card also does quite a lot. It's a 2 mana artifact that draws a card, which gives you the synergies. You can cast it using the Power Stones. You will draw a card, so you also activate those draw 2 card synergies. And you can, especially played with the Corrupt in a non-monocolor black deck. When you have this one Corrupt, you stick the Elsewhere Flask on board, collect lands. When you draw the Corrupt, sacrifice it, make every land a swamp. Boom. Hit them for 12. So yeah, lots of little things, but quite a useful thing. It has a high win rate enough of 57.4. Trap Swiftfoot Boots. I still think that there will be a deck that can use it quite efficiently, but maybe it just doesn't do enough as a card. But 48.9% game in hand win rate is just poor, and let's be honest about it. So I'm going to be careful about using it. Right, that's the lists. We only have one slide left, and that's the Signpost Uncommon rankings. So I think that most of them are good. 2 of them are markedly worse than everything else. But we have also a clear winner in Skyfisher Spider, the It is a Golgari, isn't it? Golgari, 4 mana, 3/3 reach. When it enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice a creature and is it creature or artifact? And you can destroy a non-land permanent. Great card, just like removal on a stick. It's fantastic. When you think about it, that you have the Power Stone removal in black for 2 mana, sacrifice a creature or an artifact, destroy target creature. This one would mean that the 3/3 reach spider costs 2 mana for that, which is great. So yeah, just play it. Okay, you can only sacrifice a creature. Yeah, that's good. Still, it's a really strong power, and also if it dies, it might gain you some life, but also there are ways to recur it and blah blah blah, whatever. I mean, great card. 65.6 win rate. That's the best uncommon in the format, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I'm not mistaken. It's the best uncommon in the format. And with the gap, like 2 percentage points higher than the Thopter mechanic. So yeah, pick it high. I think that the win rates on the first 5 are high enough that they should be like considered first picking if you don't have a good rare in your pack. 62.3 Evangel of Synthesis, the blue-black 2/3. When you draw a second card each turn, it gets +1/+0 and menace until end of turn. So like really good aggressive creature, can push quite a lot of damage early, and even late can make attack alls beneficial for you. Sorry. Number 3, third path Iconoclast. Play the deck with 2 of those. It's great. It's just great. I told you that there's lots of X1s. And yeah, the 1/1 soldiers are important. You can go wide enough to deal enough damage. I had games when I had 2 Iconoclasts on board. I cast a couple of spells, and all of a sudden I was just attacking with like 7, 8 of those 1/1 soldiers. They were getting slaughtered, but they were going through for 5 damage, and that was enough to win me the game. Yotian Tactician, that's the 4 mana 3/4 that gives soldiers +1/+0. Solid win rate 60.3. Thinking that Azorius has a win rate of roughly the average win rate for the format. It means that Yotian Tactician improves your white blue decks, which means that your white blue decks want to be the soldier deck that has this kind of thing. And number 5, Junkyard Genius. Again, had 3 of them in my trophy deck. The card is just great. Ramps you. It wins you late game, which is even probably more. It was much more relevant the sacrifice to give sacrifice something to give your creature menace than the ramping in my particular deck. It just worked fantastically. Great. And just below that top tier, we have Falagi Vanguard, the 4 mana 2/3 with first strike. Where before your attack, it gives +2/+0 to a target creature control. So it sort of enters with 2 power of haste damage. Arbalest Engineers, just below that, 59.3 win rate. That's the Gruul one. A 2/2 with ETB, either +1/+1 counter and haste, or deal 1 damage to any target, or make a Power Stone. Very versatile. Yeah, just very solid card. Again, it's not far off. Like it's 1% between Yotian Tactician, Junkyard Genius, Falagi Vanguard, and Arbalest Engineers. Then we have Slide Drop, Hero of the Dunes. I think this Orzhov deck is going to be strong, but we need to work on it. We need to figure out the best builds. It looks like there are cards in there. It just needs to be black. Needs to be slightly more open, and it will because people will draft more red. And some more technology should be worked on for the Orzhov deck to become successful. But solid, still 58.4, nothing to be ashamed of. And then we have a drop and the 2 cards that are really falling behind. Battery Bearer. I think that Jordan nailed it in the comments. Battery bearer, just to remind you, is what's the name? Where is the battery bearer? Come on, battery bearer. Color, multicolor. There we go. Battery bearer is the 4 mana free for creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana. This mana can be spent to cast non-artifact spells. So basically turns your creatures into power stones, and it gives whenever you cast an artifact spell with mana 6 or greater, draw a card. So technically should be good, but you need to be really playing a lot of those big cards, and you really need to be able to use those Power Stone mana at every stage of the game. And it just doesn't seem to be working. 56% win rate is on average, so it's not a disaster, but we're talking about the prime uncommon. They should have higher win rate than the average for the color, because if they don't, what's the point? I think that this is the problem, that if the battery bearer would turn your things into mana dorks, would be better. But it doesn't. No. You can cast artifacts, but you can also use abilities with battery bearer. So that's fine. Okay, the journalist, don't exaggerate. He's just claiming that battery bearer is just a giga mole that missed. It's slightly better than that, but it just probably promotes bad deck building. That's, I think, the problem with it. So maybe we're gonna get maybe we're going to get some technology that allows it to be better and catch up a bit, but that remains to be seen. And the last place is Yoshan Descent. This Yoshan Dissident. That's the green white. When artifact enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on something. So yeah, it has 54% win rate. There might be some deck that will be great with it, but that deck didn't materialize yet. So that's the problem. I think that there's no good 3-drop aggressive artifacts at common levels, and that means that it's a 1/1 for too long. So you either play non-creature artifacts, which means that you put all the counters on the Ocean Dissident, or you play normal creature, which means that the Ocean Dissident stays a 1/1 for 2 mana, which is not a great rate. That's the problem that I think is with this card. I mean, if maybe you curve this into a 3/2 that makes a Power Stone into some 4-drop, and then maybe something. But again, it creates bigger targets for removal. Right. Just before I go to the acknowledgements, maybe let's take a look at just the bombs, basically, because I never mentioned anything on the best cards in the format, but maybe it's worth it. You know what is the top card? Titania's Command. And Just Lola, man, thank you very much for giving me a lesson how good this card is by thrashing me mercilessly with it. Obviously, it's a command, so you can choose 2. Exile graveyard, gain 1 life for each card exiled that way. Useful mode when you are low on life. Search your library for up to 2 lands cards, put them into the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Useful if you need multiple colors, or if you're doing some kind of door to nothingness shenanigans. Create 2 green bear creature tokens, so good. And the last mode is just dope. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. So if you made bears, they will become 4/4s, plus everything else will be bigger. It's just insane, this card. It's just like, wow. 70%, 70.9% game and hand win rate, which is shocking. And actually, a very high opening hand win rate, which is weird for a 6-drop. Again, think about the fact that sample sizes are small, 700 so far. But I don't think it will drop much further. Then number 2 is Phyrexian Flesh Gorger. I had it in my prayer list, I can attest. 7/5 Menace Lifelinker for 7 with ward, pay life equal to its power. It's pretty good. Titania's Command has 70% win rate, 71% game in hand win rate. Phyrexian Flesh Gorger only 68.8. So much weaker. And then we have Gix's Command. So the black command, plus choose 2, put +2/+1/+1 counters on up to 1 creature. It gains lifelink until end of turn, or destroy a creature with power 2 or less, or return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand, or each opponent sacrifices a creature with the highest power among the creatures they control. It's just great. Like, all the modes can be useful at some stage or another. And this one has 68% win rate roughly. And then we have the last two Bomby status cards. Siege Veteran, that's the 3 mana Luminarch Aspirant. So 3 mana 2/2 at the beginning of combat, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And whenever another non-token soldier you control dies, make a 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature token. Card's great. And a 9 mana mythic in Portal to Phyrexia. When it enters the battle, also had in my pre-release. I had my pool had Phyrexian Flesh Gorger, Gix's Command, and Portal to Phyrexia, and nothing else than that. I was just like, that was my whole plan. Portal to Phyrexia. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices 3 creatures. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, put creature card from graveyard into the battlefield under your control. It's a Phyrexian in addition to its other types. That card is just amazing. Both of them have roughly 67.7, 67.6 win rate. So these are the bombs, the top 5 bombs for the format, with a couple of close mentions. There's actually, most of them are on the mythic level, but there's plenty. There's plenty of really good rares and mythics, and there's the best uncommon. The Skyfish Spider is like not hitting the top 10 of the cards. So those bombs are atrocious. That's why removal is so important, and that's why if you have to play your 9 mana clone thing as the top of your curve and someone else is playing Phyrexian Flesh Gorger, you're going to lose that game. Maybe that's why those raw or rarity prototype things are not great, because the high rarity prototype things are quite good. Okay. Before my voice completely gives up. Acknowledgements. Thank you to 17 Lands team. And in this spot, I would like to remind you that if you use 17 Lands, it's time to update your client if you're using the Python version. Please do it, because otherwise your games won't be recorded. That's the word from Rob, aka Viral Misnomer, aka Mr. 17 Lands. So do that. So thanks to the team, because I know how hard they were working before the format was released, and how much stress it cost them, because every single new format changes small things in the logs, and they have to decipher it between the early access event and when the format goes live. So yeah, kudos to them. And also thanks very much to Fake Jake Brown, who is helping me with releasing this as a podcast version. And thanks for the MTGA Zone for sponsoring me. And as we are on the podcast version, also thanks to SSQ and Mana Junkie, who are providing the music for the podcast version. And with that, see you next week with more data and bigger sample sizes. Till then.